Hello everybody. Unlike the other videos that I've done on this channel, I've decided to take it back to basics with this one. This channel is an outgrowth of my podcast, Politically Depressed, and in that podcast I did more episodes where I was just talking about things that have been on my mind, things that I'm trying to figure out myself, and doing that in a kind of public way to see if anyone else is thinking similar things, has answers that I haven't found. And basically, I don't have a thesis. I don't have something that I'm going to try and argue for. But as a Lebanese person, there's just so many different crises happening at the same time. And definitely since the war ended, since the ceasefire agreement was signed in Lebanon November 27th of last year, there's been less discussion of Lebanon in general. And that's kind of a shame. But I felt like even when there were discussions, it was lacking. Because I think understanding and seeing Lebanon just through the lens of Israeli aggression and only seeing it existing when it's attacked by Israel is not the most useful way to understand everything that's going on and the multiple levels of crises and collapses that Lebanon is going through. Now, of course, I will talk about Israel. I will talk about the fact that not just that the war happened, but that there have been daily violations since. But yeah, I just want to sort of do a thing where a bit even just for myself, to kind of lay it all out, put all the things that I can think of the multi level crises in Lebanon, and I don't know, make it a bit more coherent. Because on top of everything else, things have just been very incoherent lately and it's hard to make sense of it all. In fact, I think it's actually impossible just to hold all the things at once. But I'm going to try and do that in this video. And so I've broken it up into 14 different things. Obviously, they're not mutually exclusive, some are. But yeah, that's this video. Number 1, Israel. So between October 8, 2023, and the signing of the ceasefire agreement in November 27th last year, obviously the Israeli aggression destroyed so much of southern Lebanon, so much of the suburbs of Beirut. It was horrible. And the thing is that it hasn't stopped. Israel has violated the ceasefire agreement more than 8,000 times since the agreement was signed last year. And so it's kind of hard to say that the war ever really ended, because in many ways it hasn't. And when I say ceasefire violations, sometimes we are talking about massacres. Sometimes we're talking about destruction of people's homes. Sometimes it's just airspace violations with Israeli jets and drones flying overhead at low altitude, which not only has a kind of surveillance aspect to it, but is also a form of terrorism. It terrorizes the population because it's very scary things to hear. As many of you may already know, Israel actually occupies 5 strategic locations within the south of Lebanon. And another form of ceasefire violation is ground incursions. All told, the Israelis have killed over 100 civilians since the signing of the ceasefire agreement last year, and are essentially preventing anyone from returning or reconstructing the entire villages that they've destroyed. And it seems pretty clear from the increase of the frequency of these attacks, of these violations, that the Israelis are aiming to escalate, that they're hoping for a response, for retaliation, which as of yet has not come, so that they can escalate their plans to essentially ethnically cleanse the south of Lebanon. This all obviously comes within the context of what I've been calling Israel's war of expansion. And so there I want to focus a bit more specifically on South Lebanon. Number 2, South Lebanon. So a couple of weeks ago, there was this rapid escalation by the Israelis where they attacked numerous towns and municipalities across the south. which caused a lot of people to flee in scenes that were reminiscent of the war of last year. Now, again, it's hard to hold all these together, but the war didn't just end, and not just it didn't end because they keep breaking the ceasefire, but also because of the destruction that was faced in the context of that war. There are dozens of villages across the south which have been completely depopulated, destroyed, dismantled, with airstrikes and bombardments, bulldozers, and the like. And so this is a permanent state, especially since the Israelis prevent anyone from returning and rebuilding, of tension, of grievances that are just there, and unresolved. And with that said, the Israelis have also been, targeting storage facilities and reconstruction sites and cement factories, all things that are meant to help rebuild the towns that they have destroyed in a clear effort to prevent any reconstruction from actually happening. Here, just to wrap up on this section on South Lebanon, I want to read a tweet by a Lebanese journalist that I think sums up a lot of this very concisely. The situation in southern Lebanon is dystopian. Israel completely controls people's lives in the area, a high-tech occupation without the need for boots on the ground, 24/7 surveillance, drones, fighter jets, cyber espionage, intelligence assets on the ground, all controlling every aspect of life in the south. The threat of death by drone strike or through a mass bombardment is permanent. This model, developed in Palestine, is being perfected in Lebanon. People should understand that what Israel is doing is being closely monitored by militaries around the world, and will likely be used as a model in other regions of the globe. That last point that Danny brings up is really important. None of this could happen without US weapons and US approval. Basically, all of the bombs that are dropping in Lebanon, all of the airstrikes, are done with the compliance of the Americans, indeed with American equipment. And so the assault on Lebanon and Lebanon's sovereignty and Lebanon's people and land are a joint military imperialist effort by the US and Israel. And those are some pretty formidable foes to have. Number 3, Hezbollah. So I think it's pretty undeniable that Hezbollah has faced massive defeats since the opening of their support front on October 8th. If I've been reading the situation correctly, Hezbollah never wanted a confrontation with Israel, definitely not in the time that it did, and it felt sort of pressure to do so by the Tufan al-Aqsa operation and the October 7 attacks. And they said so very clearly that when the Solidarity Front was opened up, that they would close it if a ceasefire was signed. And up until the very last moment, up until well past it was clear that the Israelis wanted and were willing to go much further into the war and into their aggression on Lebanon as a whole, that they didn't want an expanded war. And I think in some ways they knew they were not prepared. And so I don't know if I need to go through all of the losses that they incurred during the war, but it's enough to say that militarily they are a husk of what they used to be. But with that said, there is definitely a lack of acknowledgement from them, but also people who support them, in just how much they've lost and what situation they're in now. To me, this kind of frustrates me because it's not, I think a lot of people, when they talk about this, there's a sense of schadenfreude, which I don't necessarily have. And to me, I'm honestly just trying to describe the situation accurately and have discussions based on that. But very few people seem to want to do so. And so aside from the military and top brass loss that Hezbollah has faced in confrontation with Israel, they've also been facing a lot of political isolation within Lebanon and the region. And so at this point, Hezbollah's kind of lost all of its internal allies within Lebanon, except for Harakat Amal, headed by Nabih Berri. And beyond that, it's kind of lost a lot of its regional allies, especially with the fall of the Assad regime in Syria, but also with the kind of acquiescence of Iran, you know, who I think they never believed that Israel or the US would ever directly attack them on their own soil, but obviously they did. And so I think Iran definitely does not want a new escalation, does not want to engage in open warfare. And so Hezbollah is increasingly isolated, even in the political, even in the regional front. And on top of all of that, there's been this push for the last few months based on the ceasefire agreement for Hezbollah to disarm. Now, many claim that the only disarmament that's described in the ceasefire agreement, the one that Hezbollah signed on to, was for them to disarm below to the south of the Litani River, which they did do, and which the Lebanese army was ensured to fulfill that, which they did. But now the demand is for Hezbollah to disarm entirely, something that the group refuses to do, seeing it as basically political suicide. And so now it's confronted not only by Israel, but also by the Lebanese state, which, it's one of the things, one of the core facets, if not the core facet of any state, the monopolization of violence. I mean, Max Weber literally describes that as the definition of the state. And so the discourse at the moment in Lebanon is not just around Hezbollah's weapons and the monopolization of violence by the state, but also the fact that there is no real strategy for defense, even with these weapons, even with Hezbollah. Like, how are people going to defend themselves from Israeli strikes and terrorism and warfare? Like, if there ever was a deterrence by Hezbollah, it no longer exists. And the state and the army and the prime minister and the president who are leading the efforts to this disarmament and entering into these discussions, they have no strategy. They have no defense planning. Like, there is no alternative. And so that's a big part of the discourse where it's like, okay, let's say we disarm Hezbollah. Let's say they acquiesce. Let's say they give up all their weapons. I mean, we've seen the Israelis have refused to stop bombarding, even in this moment of ceasefire, even when the Lebanese army is disarming Hezbollah in the south, that they're still occupying these 5 locations and seemingly, from some things I've been seeing lately, potentially expanding that occupation of the south. What is going to protect people from Israel? This, the Lebanese state has no answer. And I think that is really where the deep shit that we're in lies. How can we protect ourselves from a rampant, rabid, imperialist fascism that knows no boundaries, no rules, and is not beholden to any international law, which, quite the opposite, has the support of the chief imperialist power of the world, the United States? All of this is why a lot of people are absolutely terrified about the idea and the potential of yet another civil war in Lebanon. That I'll talk about just in a minute, but first I want to bring up this tiny thing that I don't know if a lot of people know about, but the new U.S. Embassy in Lebanon. Number 4, the new U.S. Embassy in Lebanon. So take a look at this picture. This is the plans for the new U.S. Embassy compound in Lebanon. This is not just a place to apply for visas. This is a massive, like some people are calling it a settlement. I think someone was telling me that it's the second largest US embassy in the world, seconded only by the embassy in Baghdad. And so seeing this, it's just yet another signal that the US wants to be even more deeply involved in the region. I mean, obviously it has for the last, since ever, but much more so with its base in Lebanon. I mean, this is a research facility. It's an intelligence gathering facility. It's a base. It's really scary shit to think about why are they doing such a massive compound in Lebanon. And so with all these things, there's been this fear in Lebanon about a new civil war. And that's the subject of this next topic. Number 5, civil war. So, this, honestly, I don't know if I can talk about that much because it weighs so heavy on my soul. Both of my parents grew up in Beirut throughout the length of the 15-year civil war that officially started in 1975 and officially ended in 1990. I say officially because a lot of people, obviously, the South was still occupied till 2000, but then also there's a lot of sort of like readings about the contemporary moment in Lebanon as like a continuation of the civil war by other means. But so, yeah, a lot of people are worried about the idea of a civil war for a few reasons. One, obviously, this call for and this push to disarm Hezbollah entirely could lead towards Hezbollah literally taking arms up against the state because it sees, if it gives up its weapons entirely, it's political suicide. Sorry for the abrupt change. There's light getting into the camera. And so, yeah, I think there's one thing that I really don't like the way people talk about civil war when they use the term spiraling into civil war. Civil war is a choice, it's a political choice, and it is usually enacted to either assault or defend a certain power structure or system. Like, the absolutely worst reading of the Lebanese civil wars is one in which Muslims and Christians who had been living together side by side for so long ended up spiraling into, this never-ending conflict. And that's just like so ahistorical, but removes just what happened and removes the politics and removes the political choices from both the left and the right at the time. I'm not going to get into it here, but regardless, it's the same situation now in terms of if there were to be a civil war, it would be a political choice. And so the fear of a civil war kind of emerges from the Lebanese state's demand for Hezbollah to disarm, and not just from Hezbollah, who has its own interest in maintaining its weapons, but also from people who see a kind of betrayal in the Lebanese state in this moment. When Israel is still bombarding and killing people and martyring people, and the Lebanese state's priority is not to defend those people, but to disarm Hezbollah, to disarm other militant groups. For them, they see this as a betrayal, an attack on their right to resist. And so you have tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people in the South who see this government as not acting out of their own interest. And so this is a pretty bad recipe for a state. But with that said, I think one aspect that makes me think that I don't necessarily see a civil war on the horizon is I don't think people are up for it. And I just don't see the kind of, war economy within Lebanon that kind of existed within the 70s and definitely existed in the 80s. But of course, a war economy can develop. And so I don't know if I can talk about this too much longer because it honestly gets me all like mixed up inside and my stomach starts churning because it's literally the thing that political leaders leverage as a psychological tool against us in Lebanon. Don't rock the boat. Don't try to meddle in politics because you might be risking another civil war. And obviously, those threats are kind of taken seriously because a lot of these people have the capacity to foment a civil war. So, on the whole, I do see the conflicts that are emerging in Lebanon as contradictions, as, two mutually exclusive, if not more mutually exclusive interests that could potentially lead to a civil war. But at the same stretch, I don't see it. And maybe I just don't want to see it because I can't. It is just so. This gets me so frustrated thinking about it, honestly. I'm just going to move on to number 6. Disarmament of the camps. So, alongside the efforts to disarm Hezbollah, since the goal is to monopolize weapons under the state, the Lebanese government has also been disarming Palestinian groups and militants from within the Palestinian camps. This is another reason why sometimes I like to think about what's happening in Lebanon, not so much as just the Lebanese government acquiescing to American and Israeli demands, but also doing the thing of a state, which is monopolizing violence within the state. And so then when we think about the disarmament of Palestinian groups in the camps, this has been something the Lebanese state has been trying to do for about 60 years now. Basically, since the start of the Palestinian Revolution in, I think, 1964, there has been this conflict between the Lebanese state and the Palestinian groups, which in 68 led to the Cairo Agreement, which basically said that, amongst other things, the Lebanese army cannot engage or intervene with inter-Palestinian affairs within the camps. And so what happens is that basically the Lebanese army is not allowed to enter, is not allowed to provide security or their own security. But that's been violated a few times since. And so now, not only are there efforts to disarm the camps, but also there's this weird thing that's happening where the Lebanese army is setting up blockades within the Palestinian camps, one in specific in the north called Al Biddawi. Here you can see in this video, they set up these huge kind of concrete blocks to divide the camp from a nearby neighborhood. And this has resulted in protests by the Palestinians of the camp, which is not only kind of ignored by many people, even within Lebanese society, but also kind of reminds me of something that, again, was also very much so ignored, which is that one of the catalysts for the October 17 uprising in Lebanon in 2019 was protests within the Palestinian camps that same summer. A lot of their demands were actually kind of similar, or rather, the reason for protest emerged from the same political economic oligarchy that was strangling the population, all the while enriching themselves. But of course, the experience of Palestinian refugees in Lebanon cannot really be compared to Lebanese citizens of the state, and the conditions they live in, not just like infrastructurally, but politically and socially, is criminal. And so I think that does bring us to number 7. Number 7, economic crisis. So it really can't be understated just how severe the economic collapse is in Lebanon. It's been 5 years now, and the currency has gotten to the point where it has depreciated 98%. And sometimes when I talk to people, they ask me how does that work? And when I explain to them the economic system and the collapse, they ask me how are people getting by? And the answer is they're not. There's been a general impoverishment of the society, and so many people who had kind of been, employees and self-sustaining, a lot of people have moved back in with their family. A lot of them are sharing their incomes. A lot of people are just eating less or skipping medication. And a lot of people who are kind of getting by are getting by through remittances, because a lot of Lebanese live in the Gulf, live in the Americas and Europe, and they send money back home. And especially being paid in dollars or euros, it goes a lot further. But so, in a macroeconomic scale, the only saving grace that exists for Lebanon is the IMF. This is how low we've gotten, where genuinely we need capital. Like, aside from long-term sustainable solutions, which no one is really pushing for. I mean, not no one's pushing for, but it's just not on the agenda for the actual people who are in charge of making these decisions, like making a productive economy, for example, are even considering. And so at a macroeconomic level, the economic collapse in Lebanon has gotten so bad that even anarchists, even communists, agree that we kind of need an IMF loan. We need huge amounts of cash from states or from international organizations, despite the awareness that those things come with stipulations and dictates, which will ultimately lead us back to the same position. And I mean, Lebanon is already hugely reliant on foreign funding. Like, that is the lifeblood of the economy, like direct grants and loans to the government, to the state by the US and the EU, a lot of which, by the way, goes directly to the army, not only in its efforts to disarm Hezbollah, but also to curb migration. And I think this is always important to note, to be able to quell any potential uprisings from the economic policies that it is continuously implementing. And so, since I said the M word, let's talk about number 8. Number 8, the third wave of migration. So, another question I get asked often is, where is everybody? Why aren't there people on the streets? Why are people not sort of like resisting against this government and its policies, and not just the government, but the political class as a whole? And a pretty boring answer is that a lot of people left. The term third wave of migration refers to the fact that Lebanon is currently experiencing not just a massive wave of migration, but it is the third great wave in its history. The first was in 1918, at the end of the First World War, with the onset of the famine of Mount Lebanon. The second one is from 1975, with the onset of the civil war in Lebanon. And now, ever since the start of the economic collapse in 2019, we've been experiencing what is described as the third great wave of migration, with hundreds of thousands of people leaving Lebanon, mostly young people, in search for opportunities, for security, for safety. And I say this as one of those people. And so it is a shame, and I'm very aware of this fact, that the potential to create, bodies of opposition, organized groups to resist and oppose, and to build alternatives within Lebanon, a lot of those people who would make up those groups have gone. And again, I'm one of them. But at the same time, I'm very aware that when I was living in Lebanon, I was experiencing such crippling anxiety from the totality of all these things that I wasn't even able to think, let alone organize or agitate. And so that is something that is huge. It's a grievance because I did not want to leave, and I think a lot of these people did not want to be separated from their families and forced to live abroad and send money back home, not just because of Israel, but also because of our own state and our own political and economic oligarchy, which played with our money and bankrupted the entire country. But it does also have these added on effects of reducing especially young people, the people who would actually form the backbone of organizing efforts against these crises. And so that's number 8. Number 9, new Syrian administration. This, I don't know if I have that much to say, because it's still all up in the air, and it's still crazy to me that all this is happening, that the Assad regime actually fell, that al-Shara is in the White House meeting Trump, that he met with General Petraeus, like both of them were literally in the battlefields of Iraq. Petraeus as a general within the invading imperialist army, and the Shara as imprisoned as an Al-Qaeda fighter. It's absolutely bonkers. But so, as far as Lebanon is concerned, it's just a new paradigm. There has been cross-border fighting between Lebanon and Syria, and a lot of that has to do with the nature of the border itself, which is very difficult to understand. I remember when it was first happening and it got kind of serious, that I was reading more into it, and the border is such a porous thing that there are people on both sides, tribes, families, who have, land over there that they farm and factories over here. And I mean, there's also smuggling routes and the like. But yeah, there was some discussion a few months ago. I mean, some scary things about, claims that North Lebanon is part of Syria, which again is not the kind of decolonial thing that I think about, where it's like it's all Syria and Palestine or whatever. this is still very much within the neo-colonial thinking within these nation states. But so at the moment, I don't necessarily have any big fears about that, but it is just something that's like there, and it's just a new paradigm. It's a new thing. It's yet to meet a point of crises. There's not much like spillover. I mean, with the assaults on Sueda, there's definitely been some sort of like mobilization within Lebanon, but not to a kind of like high degree that like sort of emerges much or that's accessible to understand. But with that said, just wanted to mention it. Number 10, ecological violence and collapse. This one, even though it's coming a bit late, is definitely one that I think is a huge problem and is going to get only worse and worse. So, I mean, the one that I think most people know about is the fact that the Israelis have essentially committed ecocide in the south of Lebanon, not just by their bombardments and airstrikes and intentional wildfires, but also by their use of chemical weapons like white phosphorus, which have literally poisoned the land. And so, as I speak, there is a wildfire raging in Lebanon, which has been increasing in frequency in Lebanon over the last 10 years. But this one is part climate change, part Israeli assaults. And alongside that, this year, the Ba'a Valley in Lebanon, the Baqa Valley, has experienced a pretty terrifying drought, which is not just in the Ba'a Valley, but also in southern Syria. And this drought is really scary because the land is not only people's livelihoods, but it's literally part of the Fertile Crescent. Like, this is the backbone of the so called agricultural revolution. And so, if from 10,000 years ago, and so if this place, runs out of water and there's a drought there and whatever, it's a scary sign of the real effects of climate change that we're only just beginning to witness. But so, aside from these two things, there's another thing that's happening in Lebanon that I don't know if it gets much attention outside. I think it's only like Megaphone that's like reporting on it, which is this construction site in an area of Lebanon called Amshit, and it is threatening the habitat of monk seals. Look at these guys. Look how adorable they are. And they are an at risk animal, and their habitat is within these caves in Amshit. And there's this construction site that is being built on top of the caves that has been sort of like sanctioned against by the government, but they've done nothing to stop it. And the construction is ongoing, and there are protesters and environmentalists and just people of the area who are literally putting their bodies on the line to prevent this construction. And so, even though this might seem like a minor thing compared to everything else I said, this is part of the ecological extractivism and violence that comes with private property, that comes with this developmental mind of like, I don't know, build and disregard the environment, disregard the land, that comes from, within. This isn't an Israeli company. This isn't an American company. It's a Lebanese guy. And so, for a lot of people, and the reason that this is activating people is the sense of injustice, of frustration with these contractors and private businesses and people who can just do what they want with the land and with public beaches. And there has been a strong environmentalist movement within Lebanon that resists such operations and such projects. And so, hopefully this doesn't go through and they're able to stop this construction. But also, yeah, I think the mobilization around this really demonstrates the frustration people have with the not just the corrupt nature of our government, but with some people's complete disregard for the land and the other creatures that inhabit it with us. Number 11, the Tannourine Crisis. So this one is absolutely ridiculous, and I know it doesn't get coverage anywhere else except for Lebanon, but Lebanon as a whole does not have a public water system. That's up to the municipalities, and even within the municipalities, they often, there's like water in the taps, but it's not drinkable. And even then, the water sometimes doesn't come and you have to get a private truck to fill your water up. But again, that water is not drinkable. And so the only drinkable water you get, you have to buy in bottles. And one of the companies, Tannourine, there was a report that came out that said that their water was polluted. This caused a scandal, and what emerged is just so indicative of Lebanese politics and how the political economic oligarchy in Lebanon functions. Basically, it came out soon after that some people were accusing the people accusing Tannourine of having polluted water, of fabricating the results, because the owner of Tannourine is affiliated with one political party, I think the Lebanese forces, not the Lebanese armed forces, the Lebanese, like LF, which is a far right Christian party. And so immediately this whole thing got very sectarian. And aside from that, there's this one clip I saw on Lebanese TV wherein it's this like talk show, and different guests were given like the reports, the findings of a test for different water companies. And so they read the findings, and all of them were clean, were safe to drink. And the most absurd thing, because after reading each one, they read the thing, it's clean. Everyone applauds, like the audience applauds. Absurd, absurd timeline. And then the presenter of the show thanks the capitalists that bottle this water and resell it to us for, being very good to the society. Nowhere in this entire discussion is it ever mentioned that this water should not be private, that this is water, that this is public resources that belong to all of us, and that it must be collectivized and actually distributed in a proper way and not just sold to us for profit. And the whole thing is ridiculous. And so with that, here are two more things that I think don't get any coverage, or it's never really tied in whenever people discuss Lebanon. Number 11, the Kafala system. So again, I don't know how many people know about the Kafala system. I think there is more knowledge about it. And it's Googleable, there's so much out there, it's very accessible. And it's a system that not only exists in Lebanon, but across the region. And functionally, what I'm describing when I talk about the Kafala system in Lebanon is the existence of over 200,000 people in Lebanon who exist essentially in a system of modern slavery. This is not just a stain on our conscience. This is not only a constant crime and criminal system that is sort of enjoyed by the Lebanese population as a whole, but it's kind of one of the backbones of the economy in terms of access to very cheap, very disposable labor. And so whenever you see a video of, Beirut, like Lebanon is on the rise again, Lebanon will be whatever, people at bars, people in clubs or whatever, like we're back. A lot of those like institutions, a lot of those bars and pubs and restaurants and cafes rely on kafala system labor, as in cheap, exploitable labor, to turn a profit. And not just that, it also services as a cheap domestic labor, you know, which is a system also ripe with abuse, and it's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. But I never feel comfortable talking about like the problems in Lebanon without talking about the kafala system, even though it's not like super tied to like Israel, to the US, to whatever. Because to me, thinking within Lebanon, that is like just one of the main things that's like a horrible thing that needs to be dismantled. It needs to be abolished. Number 13, riots in Roumieh. So this is another thing that definitely gets like zero coverage outside Lebanon, but even within Lebanon, it really does not get much attention, which is I've noticed an increased frequency of protests and riots within prisons in Lebanon, specifically the Roumieh prison, which is one of the largest and most notorious prisons in Lebanon. A lot of these protests essentially emerge from the horrible criminal conditions within these prisons, which are just so substandard. And I've read so many horror stories and heard personal accounts from people I know of just these horrible conditions these people are put in that I think most people don't think about because they're so kind of like ingrained within this very kind of, prison justice system where it's like, yeah, it's bad, but they're prisoners, they've done horrible things, so they deserve to suffer. Or, they've foregone their right to humane treatment for what they've done. Even though a lot of people in these prisons, in these structures, are in pretrial detention, have never actually faced trial, are innocent, or, you know what I mean? Like, are petty criminals, sorry, like, are convicted of petty theft or whatever. Meanwhile, obviously, the biggest criminals in our society are not just roaming free, but ruling the country. And so the prison system in Lebanon is one of those things that I think no one really talks about outside of Lebanon. I mean, why would they? But at the same time, it's something that's really important, especially for people, I mean, in Lebanon, but also people who stand in solidarity with Lebanon to understand. And so, yeah, that's that. Moving on to the next and last one. Number 14, lack of coherent left. And so this is another one of those things that's kind of hard to talk about because I'm just very understanding of how burnt out people are, of how many people have lost their families, their friends, their homes, their land, how many people have had to leave this country altogether, how many people are just burnt out from the economic collapse, who, are just living with this constant threat of a new war, either civil or, imperialist. And it's a lot. It's a lot. So I don't blame anybody. But just in a kind of identifying situation type thing, there does lack in Lebanon any serious left. There does lack any potential, I see, of a movement, of like a unified front, of a coalition that not only can seriously oppose the Israelis, but also the Lebanese like state and the Lebanese bourgeoisie and Lebanese capital, the international capital. It's hard. It's very difficult. And on top of that, a lot of people have left. So there's not a lot of people to like engage with that kind of work. And even those that can engage or who are there are not able to psychologically or even financially because a lot of people are just, working and working for very little and in very precarious conditions. Anyway, sorry, I got really depressed there at the end. Um, all this to say that just to identify it, I do see the things or the groups or the movements that could oppose some of these things are lacking. There is not obviously, there is stuff happening. There are people, there are movements. Obviously, I don't know why I keep saying obviously. None of this is obvious, but it's not enough. So I really don't know. It's a really difficult situation where I'm very aware that the things that need to happen are kind of impossible for us right now. But I don't see an area within the near future where it will become possible. And so we're in this kind of like impossible situation where what's necessary is just unthinkable. And so, like I've said for years now, Lebanon is in dire need of a real internationalism. And honestly, here I'm going to be a bit whatever. I don't necessarily see that forming. I see a bit, I see pockets, but there are very strong and to me like limiting limitations of the global movement in solidarity for Palestine that I think makes sense more for Palestine. But then when that same energy is just shifted to Lebanon, I think it misses so much because Lebanon is not Palestine. Like Lebanon is a state. Like we have internal issues. We have whatever. We're not a colonized people in the same way Palestinians are. Like when I remember the escalation of the aggression happening in Lebanon, that people started just like, saying, they're already saying free Palestine, and then they start saying, oh, free Lebanon. And I just kind of cringed every time I heard that, because it's not the same situation. Lebanon is not, Palestine is occupied, free Palestine from Zionist occupation and colonization. With Lebanon, whenever I hear free Lebanon, I'm thinking, are you saying free Lebanon from the Lebanese bourgeoisie? Like, because that's what I'm thinking. And that's what a lot of people are thinking. I mean, they don't use that terminology necessarily, but from the Lebanese oligarchy as well. Like, not just from the imperialists and from the Israelis, but also from our own shitty, exploitative, criminal, warlord oligarchy, which understanding that is a different level. So anyway, I didn't want to make this video too long to begin with. I hope you like this. I hope you like this format. I don't know. I might repeat it in the future, but it's definitely been more comfortable than sitting on a chair talking. But at the same time, I don't know if this distance feels weird, or just this rambling nature feels a bit disconnected or like hard to follow. But either way, if you like this video, like and subscribe. If you really like this video, I've got a tip jar called in my Ko-fi, kofi.com/amonmac. It's in the description. Even a bit of money goes a long way, and it really helps me sustain this work. So yeah, also leave any comments you want. I do actually read literally every comment, but I only respond to the ones that are like clearly written in good faith. And yeah, so with that said, I'll see you all in the next one.